Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Hope that your week so far is going well, and I hope that you are ready for another fun interview with an author. Today's author is Trish Evans. We are talking about her debut novel. It's called Katy's Ghost, but twist. Shock factor, this is not suspense. Yes, it sounds like it could be a thriller, it could be suspense, but this is not. Katy's Ghost is a different kind of book, which is kind of exciting when I often have a lot of thriller and suspense. And as I've mentioned before, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's opened my reading habits up to books that I would not have normally read, and I've read some really great thrillers and suspense, so I can't complain, but this does not happen to be one of those books. So here is the description of Katy's Ghost by Trish Evans. Haunted by childhood traumas, happily married Katy Wellborn is at a crossroads. In her late 30s, her biological clock ticking, she has survived cancer, but her fears of family skeletons dangling in the genetic closet have paralyzed her from becoming pregnant. That's when her long-departed grandmother Nellie appears as sort of a guardian angel, leading Katy on a journey back through the tortured pages of her past. With unexpected humor and often profound insights, Katy revisits a series of traumatic encounters. A severely schizophrenic uncle whose presence threatens the entire family, an emotionally unstable sister who has spiraled into the lost zone of Southern California's 1960s drug-infused counterculture, and a well-meaning suburban family torn apart by its own bizarre eccentricities. Set in the 1990s with flashbacks to the 50s and 60s, Katy's Ghost takes readers into painful territory, captured with a soft soul. So there you go. You get Katy's Ghost, but it's not a scary ghost. It's the ghost of her grandmother. And I guess it depends on which of my grandmothers decided to make an appearance in my life, and for what reason, how helpful that might be. My grandmothers were very, very different in personality, and I can imagine being very happy to see one of them and kind of like, whoa, hi, what, why with the other one. So, I mean, maybe I could ask a bunch of questions that I didn't get answered in life. I don't know, but Katy's Ghost, as I said, is her grandmother Nellie, and this really is a book that takes you on a journey through a family's ups and downs. It does take place in the 1990s, but the family history takes you on a journey back through different time periods, through, as it says, the counterculture of the 60s with Katy's sister. You get a look at mental illness in terms of her uncle, but it's a different time period than what we know now, where we're starting to be a little bit better about understanding mental illness. But, in the 50s and 60s, there was a much different understanding of that. And all of this profoundly affected Katy's life and affected how she is moving forward or not moving forward in her life as it is in the present, or in the 1990s, but the present as the book knows it. So it's really an interesting read, and it's true. It does explore with a lot of humor. Graham, she's kind, she's funny, she's a little strange at times, but she really does have Katy's best interests at heart. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview with Trish so she can tell you more about her book, Katy's Ghost. Hi, Trish. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
I love being here. Thank you.
And we are here to talk about your new novel. It's called Katy's Ghost. Before we get to the novel, though, I would love for my listeners to get to know you a little bit. So if you could share something about yourself.
Sure, I'd love to. Let's see. I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in Pasadena, California in the 1950s and 60s. My family was a conglomeration of journalists, writers, and musicians. And an uncle was an opera critic for the San Francisco newspaper back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. Let's see, I graduated from Northwestern, met my husband there. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree from the School of Speech. And then I became a teacher for the deaf and the hard of hearing. And for several years, I taught in Illinois, where we lived for a while, and then back in California. And then I decided to get a master's degree in marriage and family counseling. I wanted to be a counselor to the families of deaf children, because I had found out that a lot of my children would go home and be at the dinner table and not be a part of the conversation with their families because they just couldn't keep up with what was going on. So I got my master's and I did a little bit of counseling, and then I started work at USC with toward a doctorate. And at that time I was diagnosed with cancer. And so it was during my recovery at that time that I kind of took a different turn. I started writing for my husband's children's television shows. And then I started writing, just journaling about me and people and instances. And then I started writing Katy's Ghost. So that's where I am right now.
All right. Well, that is a lot. You could we could have a whole long conversation about just all those things that you were just talking about. But we are here to talk about your book. So if you could give an overview of Katy's Ghost, that would be great.
I would love to. Let's see. Katy's Ghost, I kind of think of as a fictional memoir. It's set in the 1990s with flashbacks to the 1950s and the 1960s, and it starts with Katy McAndrews sitting at her table. Her dining room table. She's 38 years old. She's just been told by her doctors that despite having been cancer-free for 3 years, that they do not recommend her getting pregnant, which is a blow to Katy and her husband because they had really wanted to start having a family. At this time, her grandmother shows up, her grandmother who's been dead for 11 years. She calls her Gram, and Gram appears and talks to her and kind of takes her through the past to find out the different things that are holding her back, that have held her back for a long time, some of her tortured past. A main character is the Uncle Raleigh, which is Graham's second son, and he's just 16 years older than Katy, and he's scary. He has paranoid schizophrenia, and people did not really know much about this in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and he kind of haunts her throughout life and becomes a reason for why she held off so long to have children. But I find that Gram is sort of a metaphoric terms. She's a spirit who has come back just to help Katy kind of share some of their traumatic background together. A lot of it is heartwarming and funny, and a lot of it is a little bit dark and sad. But it's a good story for women, I think, because women face a lot of these same issues. Mm-hmm. So that's about it.
And when you read the title, Katy's Ghost, you think, oh, well, okay, so there's this spirit that's visiting her. You think maybe it's going to be a little bit of a suspense or thriller, and that's not it at all. It's not scary. It's just Gram.
Yes.
But you do deal with a lot of dark issues, as you said, mental illness, drug addiction, death in families, just a lot of heavy subjects. And Gram really comes at a time in Katy's life when she needs a bit of direction and so, is Gram really there? Is she not really there? Does it matter? Because she gives Katy what she needs.
That's exactly right, Sarah. In writing the book, I struggled at first trying to decide if she would be a ghost, a spirit, an angel. And what I really decided is she's just in metaphorical terms. It's really Katy dealing with these issues. And it's sort of the spirit of her grandmother taking her back, but she doesn't have to really be there. It's like all of us, we look back at our past and we're kind of, we deal with things, and it's almost like we're being led to think about them and come to terms with them.
We are going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Graham's appearance in the book. It's on the first page, and it is quite humorous in its own right, but makes me think about, again, as I said before, what would happen if my grandmother appeared just suddenly at my dining room table. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Trish Evans about her debut novel, Katy's Ghost. And I was laughing a little bit when I first started reading the book because Graham appears and Katy is sitting at her dining room table, and Graham wants to know what happened to her dining room table that she left for Katy, and Katy's thinking about the guilt trip of a ghost, and I was trying to picture if my grandmother showed up, what sort of Norwegian guilt trip would she lay on me?
Now we have the same Norwegian background. You're exactly right. In fact, there was something that I used to have with Graham. I've always thought of this. She had a needlepoint from her mother that her mother had made, and it said, "Too soon we get old. Too late we get smart." And I often think of Graham with this because I couldn't quite figure out what it meant until I got quite a bit older. And she used to say this to me, say this little saying, and I think that's what happened in her life. She had to struggle with things that she didn't know how to deal with in her life, and until much later she had the wisdom. So I think she was giving the wisdom to Katy too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In terms of Katy as the main character, can you talk a little bit about her and what you think will resonate with readers in terms of her character?
I think that Katy is a good person who has come to a hard point of trying to face challenges. And I think that Katy, like most of us, some things in our past we push down, we block out, or they become reasons for not moving forward in life. And Katy is one of these people who has actually had her past keep her from moving forward. She's happily married. She loves her husband. She loves their life. And she's afraid of death. And because of having dealt with the breast cancer, she's afraid of not having children, which I think a lot of women have the same kind of fears. And she just is somebody who has to struggle through these issues, like most of us, in order to come to terms with life and moving past and moving forward.
And yeah, I mean, it's this interesting dichotomy in that you start the book and she's wanting to get pregnant, but being told that she shouldn't. And then throughout the course of the book, you find out that she's kind of had this mantra her whole life of, I'm never having children. So you get this interesting dichotomy between those two impulses that she's still struggling with. And
that's right. And it was because of her uncle and his illness, and because of her sister, who Katy thought was almost by osmosis developing the same characteristics of the uncle's mental struggles and illness, that Katy just had decided her parents were good parents. How did this happen? And she just thought, you know what? I can't have children. And it was a struggle. and it became a struggle for her husband and herself before they got married. And you're right. So now the clock is ticking, and she's had the cancer, and now she's really forced to face the fact that all these things have kept her from having the child that they really want.
You get this struggle, and you get this. You really see the layers and the complexity of Katy's life and her relationships, and how her past has, like all of our pasts, has really influenced her thinking. And how she interacts with her family.
And also, Sarah, I think it's also the fact that Katy realizes through these journeys with her grandmother, she realizes that it was her perception was what kept her back, and that her perception now, as Graham takes her through these things, is so much different. And if she had the same, wisdom and perception about her uncle and her sister, and maybe more love and forgiveness towards their issues, she would have been able to be at a different spot in her life, where maybe she already would have had children. And so it was her perception as a child, and then moving into adulthood, and finally coming to terms with her perception was not entirely correct about who they were and what went on in her family.
Yeah, and her relationship with Graham really explores that. You get the backstory of their relationship and how close she was with her when Graham was alive, but now whatever form Graham has appeared in is really talking about that unconditional love, that forgiveness, not for the people that Katy's upset with, but for Katy herself. Right.
And there are nobody's in the wrong in this story. There's everybody who's dealing with life, and there's nobody who's trying to harm or hurt anybody. And I have to say that with Graham, I often thought, as I was writing, when Graham emerged to be so prominent in this story, I just thought it was so interesting that 11 years before appearing in the book's opening pages, that she chose to make an appearance in my book. And I think in itself, that's testimony to the power of her presence in my life, and I think other writers have the same thing. There are certain people who just happen to guide you and speak to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Even if it's not, as tangible as it is in this book, I think about some of the conversations they have in the beginning of, when Katy smells like gardenia, she thinks of her grandmother, and so it got me to thinking of what are the things in my life that caused me to think of those who have gone before, and
that's right.
Kind of guide me.
Yes, to this day, I will pick a gardenia. It is my favorite flower, and put one in a little bowl and smell it. And I do think of my grandmother and my mother when I do that. You're exactly right. So many things. And I think many people have had close relationships with their grandmothers, and I think that that's an important relationship, It just is something. I think a grandmother sees things differently than a mother and a father. Obviously have to, especially with their wisdom of having already raised children.
Mhm. Mhm. So you mentioned that this was kind of a fictionalized memoir. Did you do any kind of research when writing the book?
I did. I think a lot of my in my master's degree, I learned about a lot about children and families and the connections and what goes on. And I think a lot of my psychology background kind of helped me. I also did research a lot about cancer when I had it. So I brought it into this because it was something that was a part of Katy. She needed to research. So I did research a little bit. I went back to my psychology days and picked out different things about child behavior, human behavior. And I think it really helped me with writing this story.
Absolutely. And you've talked a little bit about the autobiographical elements in the book. How did you kind of navigate that, the fictionalized version of a memoir? How did you decide kind of what to put in and what to leave out, or what to leave as autobiographical, what to change?
Yes, and what I found is everything that was close to being autobiographical. Autobiographical.
I do that all the time.
My tongue is stuck. It's not operating. Anyway, what I think of is what I would put in is things like gardenia, but the moment that Katy has that gardenia that you just spoke about, there was never a time when Graham and I sat there and did exactly that. Or the cancer was not exactly in Katy's life. Not everything was true to my story. And I just liked weaving in things that I know. I think most writers do that. They weave in things that they know and have felt, and then it something else comes in, it becomes a whole different story or a whole different event. But it's triggered by, true to life things, I think. So, and Katy truly was sort of my lead in this, and she was sort of like me, but not totally. And how she dealt with these things, I would say I did too. So I did have a schizophrenic uncle, but none of these events, all the events are kind of woven into other things that I made into the story.
Let's go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, Trish will be talking a little bit more about how she got into writing fiction, how she decided to write this particular book, what's coming up next for her, etc. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am having a delightful time today speaking with author Trish Evans about her debut novel, Katy's Ghost. Let's go ahead and turn now to the conclusion of that interview. You've had, a variety of different experiences and careers throughout your life. So what was the prompt that said, I want to write this novel and now seems to be the right time?
It just happened. I often wrote, but I never thought of writing a book. I had a brother who won a Pulitzer Prize he was an editor for the San Diego Tribune. I had another brother who was a writer, and he was an editor in Boise, Idaho. My father worked for the LA Times when he was young. So writing was important in our life. My father was really he would bring us to the table and we would talk and discuss things, and he would encourage reading and writing, and some of that was in me, not like my brothers, but it just happened that when I was going through the master's degree, you had to do a lot of writing. And so I started that, and then it turned into just a natural, just starting to write. And it just came about. I helped with storytelling in cartoons that my husband produced, and I thought, I have a story to tell, and so I started to write it. It wasn't like I was a lifelong journaler or anything like that, but it was a story I wanted to tell, and it came very easily.
And are you working on anything now? Would you like to continue writing in this capacity?
Oh, yes. I have two other books. One's coming out in the spring. It's a series. It's called the Burger and Fries series. The title of the first book is called The Mom Prom. And it's a story about these, 40-year-old women who are heads of an auction, and there's a murder. And this is a totally different genre. It's more of a women's fun read. It's a beach read more than anything. It's not heavy. There's a mystery. There's a murder. And these two women are not quite like Lucille Ball and Ethel, but a little bit in that they get mixed up in these kinds of things. So that's that. And then there's the second book, and it's almost ready. So one's going to come out in early April, the Mom Prom, and then the other will probably come out in the fall.
Okay, that sounds very fun. And you said it's a series. Do you have an idea of the arc of that series, or are you just going to write as long as they keep speaking to you?
I think it's just going to be 3 books, because I also have a Christmas book that's almost ready to come out. It's in the editing process. So I think it'll just be 3 series with that. I'm working on the 3rd of the series, and it's really fun to write. But I think I then want to go on to something a little bit different, too. So I think it could continue, but I think I'll pause for a while with the burger and fries. It just so happens that the 2 women, their last names really are Burger and Fries, so that's why it's called the Burger and Fries series.
I love it.
Yeah.
Out of your particular writing journey and, what brought you to this point, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Oh, my goodness. I'm probably the last person who can give advice, but the one thing I would say is that if you feel the urge, just write it. Don't worry about the whole process as you're writing, but write from your heart, write from what you know, and believe in it. And I think the book will come. The writing comes, and let other people read and discuss it with you and share it with you, and have fun with the process. I think is really the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that can be hard when you're trying to get something accomplished, and there's so many steps in the process, and there's the rejection, and I think the fun can get lost.
But you are so right about that. But oh my gosh, you got to stick with it, because there's a reason why you're wanting to write. There's something in you that wants to come out. So I think it's important for every person who has the desire, just go and write what you have, and accept criticism, and just know that people will read it and be inspired.
Mm-hmm. When you take time to read for yourself, do you have favorite authors or genres?
You know what? I have several. I recently finished A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, and oh my gosh, his writing is just beautiful. It was intoxicating. You could not stop reading. And then I love Elizabeth Strout, Olive Kitteridge, and all of her books like that. She has a quirky sense of humor. And then I just finished also Eleanor Oliphant, and that's by Gail Honeyman. It was a fun little read. And then I have to say, I also loved reading. Do you know Jim Gaffigan? He is a comedian who wrote a book, Dad is Fat. I laughed throughout the whole book. It was so fun. Oh my gosh. So I loved, lots of things. I mean, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I love to read about things about World War II, and I love just about every kind of thing. I am not a science fiction reader. I'm not that kind of thing, and I'm not a horror fiction writer either. And I know Katy's Ghost sounds like there might be something scary in it, but I don't enjoy reading things that make me scared and go to bed at night a little bit sleepless. So I don't read murder mysteries, and I don't read sci-fi either.
Yes, I hear you. I've expanded my reading to include the suspense and horror genre since I started the podcast. And I'm getting a little better at it, but I always ask, am I going to be able to sleep? When people ask me about, featuring their book.
That's it. I had read one years ago, and I said, that's it. I'm not reading another one of these. I can't sleep. I can't think of anything else. So I did read with my son all the series, the Harry Potter series, and honestly, he did not get scared, but I did, even though it was fun fantasy.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. In terms of your internet presence, do you have a website?
Yes, I do have a website. I can be reached at TrishEvansBooks.com. And I can be reached on Facebook at Trish Evans Books. And then I have an email, which is trish@trishevansbooks.com. So I'm on Kindle. I'm on Kindle and Amazon. I'm on Barnes & Noble, and I'm also on Indie Books. So I can be reached at any of those places. I'm new at this technology. I have to tell you, before this, I really was not a Facebook person, but I'm learning to, and it's actually very fun to get on these sites. And I'm anxious to speak to readers of Katy's book and see what they think.
Is the new book available for pre-order, or will it be?
It won't be until April, and it will be then. It's still going through a final editing process, and then it's going to be, and it is up on the website. You can see on the website the cover of it, but it's not ready for pre-order. I believe April is when it is.
Okay, sounds great. We've talked about numerous things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about in terms of Katy's Ghost or writing in general? Anything that we haven't talked about?
Boy, you've covered everything. I hope that helps readers to want to read the book. And I hope readers will also text me or go on my website, let me know what they think. I hope they'll enjoy the book. It was an interesting process to write, and I think that it's a wonderful story where there are no good guys or bad guys, everybody just being human. So, I think that's about it.
Okay. I think what you just said, I really was one of the main things I liked about the book was, there are no good guys or bad guys. It's just people trying to live their lives and figure out what's going on and how they can interact with each other. Which is what we all do.
Finding forgiveness in the past, and finding love and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Trish, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it and loved the book. So thank you so very much for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, Sarah, thank you. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you once again to author Trish Evans for joining me to talk about her debut novel, Katy's Ghost. I had such an enjoyable time chatting with her, and the book really is a wonderful read. Just, it's a little dark in places, a little heavy in places, but it balances that out with love and humor. And it really is just a very enjoyable read. So if this is something that you are interested in, you should definitely check out the book and check out Trish's other novels when they come out. We can look forward to those in April. So I'm excited to read more of Trish's work. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. I do so appreciate you. As always, at this point in the podcast, I need to ask you to help me out by liking, subscribing, following, doing all those wonderful things on the internet that help us out. The best thing you can do is to give us a 5-star review that gets our podcast out to more people, so that more book lovers like you can hear book reviews and author interviews and all of the wonderful things that we can share. So thank you again. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far, and I hope that the week provides you plenty of opportunities to get lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.